the nature of governing, that famous phrase, is to govern is to choose, and in choosing he might end up disappointing some members of the Labour Party.
Let's begin then with Andy Burnham, who has promised to be unashamedly Labour when he becomes Prime Minister on Monday. He's expected to unveil a whole range of policies, including an overhaul to the social care system. He wants to make public transport, see buses, cheaper, and he's going to drive at an ambitious social house building programme. Political historian Lise Butler suggested this morning that traditional old Labour values are at the forefront, and indeed were at the forefront of his first speech as Labour Party leader.
The speech yesterday was really resplendent with historical analogies and this very sort of clear invocation of a sort of politics that predates the 1980s, right? An idea that we might turn the tide of history and return Labour to something that maybe predates neoliberalism. So he was very, very clear on wanting to be kind of non-factional. But I think he was also trying to, in lots of ways, invoke something that was kind of pre-New Labour.
Alan Tolhurst, chief reporter at Politics Home, told us that on Monday people will want to hear more detail of how Andy Burnham plans to govern.
You know, in terms of legislation, Parliament is not going to be sitting for 6 weeks. There's obviously not due to be a fiscal event if he's going to do a budget until the autumn. And so what levers can he actually kind of pull straight away to make those big changes? He's talked about things like doing something to give breathing space straight away on the cost of living. You know, how's he going to enact anything like that? I think that's the kind of the nitty-gritty that we want to hear from him on Monday as he steps through that famous black door for the first time.
Well, let's speak now to Max Wilson, former senior Labour advisor at the time Ed Miliband was leader. He's now managing director of White House Communications, which is a public affairs firm. Morning, Max.
Good morning.
Alan refers there to the nitty-gritty. Is there a fear that when he delivers that nitty-gritty, he's going to annoy some people? Who's he going to annoy?
Well, in his speech yesterday, he made a massive point of saying he wanted to unite the whole Labour Party, and that's been a large part of his platform so far, that he wants to bring the whole Labour Party together. He wants to end factionalism. But unfortunately, I think that my concern would be that when that aspiration makes contact with political reality, it might start to fall apart, because the nature of governing, that famous phrase, is to govern is to choose, and in choosing he might end up disappointing some members of the Labour Party, and in doing so he might then create some of that tension that he's trying to avoid. So I would worry that he might be in danger of disappointing some people, but hopefully that won't be the case. Hopefully that he's got enough political goodwill, enough political capital stored up that he can find a way through, but also he can reach for those aspirations and policies that actually appeal across the Labour divide and also across the political divide throughout the country.
Yeah. When it comes to, I suppose, the policy priorities, it's reported that he is going to, for example, free the North Sea from the current Miliband-infused shackles that the oil and gas industry are currently operating under. That seems to be gathering pace, actually, that Burnham's going to take a far more liberal approach to new drilling in the North Sea. And I suppose that is an example of why I asked that first question. There's a risk that some of the stuff he goes for is not going to be universally popular within his own party. And it's about, I suppose, how he manages that. How can he manage that, Max? What are the lessons from the last 2 years that might help him avoid this becoming too much of a problem?
Well, to take that particular example, I think there is a way through that political challenge. I think that what Ed Miliband has previously done, in my view, quite successfully at DNZ, was articulate an economic argument about how actually Britain's future in terms of both energy security is through its own sustainable energy, but also that in investing now in that sort of sustainable energy infrastructure will lead to greater jobs, more investment in the future, and that's where Britain is going. And I think that it's possible to continue to make that argument whilst also having a little bit of immediate term realism around what this country needs. I think you can make the argument that actually in the long term we should continue along this path, but actually in the short term, there may be a way of actually coming up with a compromise. I mean, for example, you mentioned those two gas fields, one of which was supposed to be for foreign exports, one of which might be more for domestic consumption. So it could be that there is a compromise made there, whereby you can continue to make that long-term argument, but actually, in the short term, Britain could benefit from more jobs, from more energy for domestic consumption. I think that's the sort of thing that Andy Burnham will be looking to do, whereby instead of picking fights, you try and find a compromise that ideally would please as many members of the Labour factions as possible.
Yeah, it's about the sell. It's about the story that he tells. And actually, when you talk about appeasing factions of the Labour Party there, he has also spoken about cross-party working. And I'm just quite intrigued by this as a notion, which I think instinctively would come across as quite popular with the public insofar as tackling some of the big institutional issues that governments wrestle with, whether that is on the likes of social care, the NHS, whatever. Welfare cuts actually would be another good example, just while I'm thinking about them, that actually welcoming in opposition parties so that there is political consensus built around making these changes, that could be a defining part of a Burnham Prime Ministership as well.
Definitely, and Andy's got form with this. This isn't something that he's come to, overnight. As Mayor of Manchester, he inevitably had to work with, Tories, for example, and I think he did that fairly well. And he's demonstrated his pro-business credentials, securing greater investment in Manchester. But going back to my time working for the Labour Party, I remember when Andy was trying to build cross-party consensus on social care then, and unfortunately it fell apart. And it fell apart, and I'm not going to blame individual parties here, but it's the nature of politics that actually different parties believe in different things and getting things done in different ways, and so inevitably there's going to be this conflict, I think. So I think it's a very noble aspiration, and I hope that Andy does find a way to bring parties together. I just worry that actually the nature of politics and actually having political arguments and having different political opinions means that it might be quite challenging. And to go back to your other example about welfare, I think this is an example where the aspiration falls apart, because Kemi Badenoch made a big play of actually wanting to work with the Labour Party to try and find a way forward on welfare, but it was utterly performative. She was doing it purely to score political points.
Only because the invitation wasn't accepted.
No, I don't think so, Calum. I think that she knew that it could never be accepted. She was pushing on a bruise at the time. She was taking advantage of an opportunity when Labour were at its most vulnerable, and could see that the only way Keir Starmer could get those through was by working with the Tories. But in doing so, there's absolutely no way that Keir Starmer would have had any chance of surviving beyond the 5 minutes after that welfare vote, let alone the 9 months or whatever it was since then.
I mean, he was toast at that point anyway, let's be honest. But Max, I appreciate the point. Thank you very much. Good to speak to you. That is Max Wilson, who is now MD of White House Communications, but was a Labour advisor.